thanks for coming to Rana Begum, Dappled Light, written by Cliff Lauson. Just a bit of housekeeping. Jack's filming the talk, so at the end, there's a chance to ask questions. Please wait for the microphone to reach you. If you raise your hand, one of our wonderful gallery students will reach out to you. Just a big thanks to Rana and Cliff for putting together this wonderful show. We've been really lucky to open the Mead Gallery with it, and the response has been fantastic. So, really excited to see what comes out of this conversation this evening. So we have with us Cliff Lauson, Senior Curator at the Mead Gallery, and Rana Begum. And I think I'll probably leave it there, Cliff, so hopefully.
Very concise, thank you very much. So, welcome everyone this evening. Thanks for coming. Sound test. Can you hear me at the back row there? Can you hear Rana? Say hi.
No, testing.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for coming this evening. It's kind of, it feels like a reunion, maybe?
Yeah.
Rana and I've been working together on the show for, gosh, how long is it? More than a year, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, time flies.
Yeah. And it's been really fantastic to have such a sustained engagement with an artist who makes such great artwork. But we hope that this evening we can draw out some of the themes of Rana's work. Not only that, but discuss some of the newer approaches, some of the newer commissions and ways of thinking that have been enabled by this sort of gift of a show in a brand new space. And congratulations to the Mead Gallery for brilliant space. We had a nice hard hat tour very early on, and it's come a long way, so well done. I wanted to start from that introduction, Rana, by thinking about how you approach this show, because you'd had a couple of shows preceding, which were of the order of surveys, so they were sort of gathering up what you'd done over a 5 or 8 year period, presented that as a survey exhibition. And this show, I think, presented a little bit of a different opportunity. And so I wondered if you might just start us off by telling us about some preliminary thoughts about the exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, initially when I was kind of approached, I was really excited, especially after having done the show at Parasol Unit and Sainsbury Visual Arts Centre. I felt like this massive kind of weight on my shoulder to kind of then show a body of work that reflected development in the work. And I think that's when it suddenly hit me. I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna, how am I gonna show that? And second was the space, the scale of the space really initially was exciting, but then got quite nerve-wracking. So I think, when Sarah first kind of said that you'd be on board to help support kind of, I guess, navigate all the different body of work that's going on in the studio, really helped kind of ease that nervousness. But yeah, the space is quite incredible in the sense that it's huge, and how do you fill? It's not just about kind of putting up something on the wall, but how do you actually fill this volume of space? And so the architecture was something that I was having to kind of think about, and and I love the fact that it also has natural light. That's something that I remember discussing with Sarah and talking about the time of the year that the show will be, so that is also quite significant, and how do you kind of make those things kind of work? And yeah, so I think that's where you then came in the picture, which I was so relieved, because Sarah obviously had quite a lot to deal with, and because of COVID, the show got delayed by a year, and which I was really grateful for, having that extra time to think and reflect on the different series of work as well. But I think I needed that conversation, I needed that push, I needed to have a dialogue with someone that could,
Yeah, and it was a pleasure. It's a fun part of being a curator. So the calming effect and then pushing the artist.
Yeah, you were very good at that. It was like that sandwich effect, it's like nice, and then kind of in the middle it was like, what are you doing? Are you just going to fill it with huge 6 wax? I was like, yeah.
I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on what it's like from the inside, in the sense of you're given the gift, really, of an exhibition, and a space, and you said you're really grateful for the extra thinking time for a year. What's it sort of like in terms of approaching your own work? Because it's a curious thing to be asked, and I find this with a curious thing to ask artists to do, is to look at their own work through their, because you're the maker. But
I know, it was really strange, and there was a period where I was kind of left alone, and I think sometime when you're kind of left alone with your own thoughts, it's quite scary, and you don't know how to stop questioning things that are going on within the work. And I think for me, I really struggled with it. I started off making a physical model of the space because it doesn't work for me drawing things up. So I needed to kind of really physically see things kind of come together. And then I started thinking about the different things that were happening in the studio and the thought process within those series of work, and what it is that I was trying to kind of achieve with those different series of works. And I guess for me, I was really struggling with some of the connections with the work, and whether that was visible immediately or that needed kind of guidance or a narrative to kind of see that connection with the works. Mm-hmm. I mean, I myself wasn't seeing it immediately, even though, how do I explain? I guess you could say kind of the reflector works, some part of me, I can, it came from, different types of work, but I was like, well, how do you see the connection with this and the net piece and the mesh? So it's drawing on that, and that happened through the conversation with you, and which was really helpful,
And one of the things about this exhibition is that it pulls on earlier strands of your practice, and quite a few different strands of your work, but it's not a survey in the sense of how I mentioned before, as in it's not a sense of gathering up 5 or 6 years of work and then presenting it. It's almost as though you were looking at those different strands, figuring out what's happening with each of them, what makes them unique, and then taking the next step with each of them. So many of the works in this exhibition are new commissions and also site-specific commissions in that they're made for the space.
That's definitely true. I was kind of, particularly with the reflector works, these were kind of ongoing series of work, but there was something still quite new about them in the way that I was working with them and the way that I was trying to kind of push this body of work. And I wanted that aspect in the show as well. And this painting behind us is a new commission site-specific work for the gallery. It was quite daunting, but also quite exciting. I had lots of kind of, complication. I've never actually painted on canvas before. So, that was kind of something else that I had to kind of understand and figure out how to deal with certain things, and especially particularly the width of it, because I don't have a big enough studio to kind of install it and paint on it. So how do we manage that? So there was lots of technical aspects, but also conceptually, for me, I was trying to kind of come to terms with the aspect of painting and trying to kind of understand what it means to be painting, and painting on canvas as well. So that was quite interesting. And I don't quite have the answers to those questions. I'm still kind of slightly on the edge with this series of work, but I know there's something there and I could see the potential. And I wanted this show to be also about kind of taking risks. And I thought, this is something that I am taking a risk, a massive risk. Not in terms of just of scale, but actually as an artist, I don't know if it's successful, and what does it mean, how do I know if it's successful? What I know is that this body of work has led me to other aspects, and that's the work that's round the corner that you see, and that's what I really find exciting, and this opportunity of showing here has led me to that.
Yeah, I think that is quite an exciting part of the new commissions. Is nothing's sort of a fait accompli. Nothing's planned with such precision that the outcome and it's done. It's almost a snapshot of process in a way, even though the works have such sort of ambition and grandioseness about them in this particular space.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering, if that would be something that would be acceptable, to be showing work where you don't quite know, if it's resolved, and there's still lots of questions that are unanswered. And I was quite, I wasn't sure if that was something that artists are allowed to kind of do, be allowed to kind of take risks like that and say, okay, this is, slightly unresolved, even with the film as well. So this is something completely different. And I've never used that medium before. And to have a room built specifically for that work and to be shown in that way is huge and really exciting, but at the same time it's like, is it doing what I want it to do? Is it really unveiling the kind of the thought process and the different kind of influences that the work has where I'm living and working? So.
I think it's quite an exciting proposition that the work is almost a question to people rather than a statement.
Yeah.
So it's sort of opening up rather than closing down a finality.
Yeah.
Come back to the film because it's quite exciting as a completely new strand of work. I wanted to ask, you've worked a lot in the public realm, commissions for different venues, different architectures, different sites. I mean, Folkestone on the beachfront, beach huts on the seaside. And when those works of yours are in the outdoors, they tend to operate at a scale of the outdoors. So, it's in conversation with landscape, or there was the commission at King's Cross station. It's in conversation with the city. And so the work needs to speak in a way at the volume of the city and be scaled, or the landscape, and be scaled appropriately. Here, there's been a sort of scaling up process, and it's absolutely right that I do remember going to the studio, and you have a little foam core maquette, and everything's actually really big in the foam core maquette.
I know.
I remember looking at things thinking, wow, that's like 5 meters tall.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could say something about working to this particular space, because we made a couple of site visits while it was still under construction. It's great, soaring ceilings, natural daylight coming in, but having to think about how the work both inhabits the space, but still balances it with quite, a personable encounter, so that, you're coming in and you're looking at the work and not feeling sort of dwarfed by it. It's not like you're taking a piece of the outside and plonking it in the gallery.
I think
delicate.
I think I'm constantly thinking about the relationship with the body, the work and the body, and firstly, kind of the first experience you have as you enter a space, and how that then, as you navigate through the space, how that changes and how you then experience the material, the form, the colour, the light, all of those kind of, I think for me, I feel kind of, it's quite sensory, how do you pronounce it? Sensory experience, and how do I make that kind of, how do I heighten that? Or how do I make someone more aware of their surrounding? And particularly light and the experience of light. And that can either be done, on a flat surface or a three-dimensional form. So I think, for me, there's no difference between how you experience work in an outdoor space, whether it's kind of set against landscape or architecture in a city. It's no different. It's the same kind of experience. I'm looking at the works within a gallery space. I think particularly with this space, what was really exciting was that it had so many possibilities. I could literally, there was no restriction for me, and I loved that. And in some ways, it's also quite scary not having any restrictions. And sometimes, when you have challenges and limitation, it can push the work in a different way. But because I had the freedom to really show whatever I wanted, it was exciting, but also quite scary. And I think so that what I looked at then was what was happening in the studio, and there's lots of different things happening in the studio. We're working on different projects, and that's throwing up questions, and also, things are being answered by different series. And it's how we kind of did that was,
and with the painting in particular, which is a lovely backdrop to a stage. I said they should hang on to it. Makes a permanent feature of the gallery. This canvas, as you said, you can see in the film out front in the foyer that it didn't... Actually, the studio isn't as big as this wall. So there wasn't a point at which you could hang the whole painting to take it in and look and understand its composition. You've made spray paintings at a more modest scale. And I wondered if you could say something about enlarging that to this scale.
Well, it's actually, most of the work, it was really difficult to see in the studio how it would come together, how it would look. And even these towers, I couldn't see them all kind of set up. I could only imagine, and in the same way, I had to kind of imagine what this would look. I knew that with this piece of work, I really wanted movement, and how do I kind of, how do I express that movement? How do I kind of actually physically make that happen without really seeing it? So the first time seeing it here was, was great, but I knew that there was still more work I had to do, so I had to kind of think about all the different works that needed, extra work at the gallery. So even the network, I had no idea how that was going to look. And that's quite scary, because when you're working at this scale and not know how the show might end up being is really freaks you out. So there was a lot of moments where I was kind of really doubting about not only about the work but about the entire show and whether it will come together. And I mean, it's still in the back of my head. So yeah.
Yes, it comes together.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see how, because although you say that, I've always had a sense that when you're working in space, in the space rather, it's completely intuitive. Yeah. So you unfurled this canvas into the gallery, saw it as a whole for the first time, and it's obvious to you in your head once you see this part needs touching up, need to overspray there, need to like adjust here and here to give the work the effect that you want. Yeah. Same with a net, as then show up with a couple boxes worth of netting. But that process is just, it's like music in your head of just hanging it, and you kind of know what you want, even if it isn't completely designable at the outset.
Yeah, well, this was actually something that came up in the earlier talk that I was doing today, which is about kind of trusting your instinct and intuition in the work. And sometime I think, because when you're doing a show like this, every detail needs to go through and be assessed, and not only just for kind of health and safety, but also being prepared in terms of how it might get installed, and the tools and the number of people you're going to need to install. So this canvas, I think it needed like 10 people, and we just couldn't, there was a lot of things that we had to kind of think ahead and plan for and stuff. So now I've lost the track. Yeah, so the instinct is quite, it's really important. It's important in terms of not only, the way that the decisions I make in terms of the colour choices, the form and the scale and all of that, it's there, but it also has to then stretch to giving, the information that's needed to then come together in the space. I think it was only actually few nights before it, because I had to also leave it time for the canvas to dry, so a few nights before I realised that actually I wouldn't need to do that much work with the canvas in terms of painting, because I managed to kind of get it to a place at the end. It was only at the last minute that I was starting to feel kind of happier and more confident about the work.
And the same goes for the mesh installation around the corner here, which you've done a smaller version at Mead Gallery in London, but that was also an installation that had more of a mass to it. It's the spheres were sort of more tied together, and it held almost like a floating object. And I think working intuitively here, you ended up with sort of much more of a dispersed cloud-like effect, because there's spheres sort of coming off of the main body. So that's an intuitive thing as well.
There was a lot of conversations happening, kind of trying to resolve kind of the technical issue with that work and how that might get installed, and how structurally the ceiling might support the work as well. So along with all of that in the back of my head, I was trying to think about kind of visually, how did I want the viewer to experience the work. And I think, this piece became really a massive kind of connect, the two really connects for me. And again, it was like, how do I really get the movement within the work? I knew that I wanted a lightness and this kind of weightlessness within the work, but I didn't know whether I could achieve the movement. But I think the space was big enough to allow the viewer to walk all the way around. And so as you enter the space, you really see the clouds quite low and just floating in the space. But what you don't expect is this kind of drama at the end when you go to the back of the room, that when it kind of lifts up. And those are kind of surprising things that happened while installing, which I couldn't obviously plan for. As much as kind of you do drawing and sketches and, you know, make models, you can never kind of quite get it right until you're in the space, and you don't really know how the shapes would kind of come together as well.
Yeah, it's quite wonderful, the process of that unfolding, because there's a physical model, and I think we both actually really like working with physical models in miniature, but you also in the studio produce some pretty millimeter accurate digital models for the purpose of, you know, figuring out weights, sizes, how much space something might take up. So there's two different ways of studying that, but then it's still an installation, quite a free process.
And it's trying to get that balance, and I think sometimes, you know, it's quite difficult to, especially in the public art sector. Actually, we're working on another project, just Megan Piper's here, with the line, and the cloud piece is going to be produced for outdoors, and that has been kind of intense. It's been going through intense amount of kind of structural
work,
kind of work, and I'm kind of freaking out inside because I have no idea how it's going to look. Even though I have an illustration of what it might look, I know that it could look completely different to what we've proposed. Don't freak out, Megan. But yeah, it's, you know, it's just kind of constantly having to remind and say, I need that freedom. I need that. I need those moments where I could have that opportunity to allow the work to take me where it needs to go. And so you have to be able to work with a team of people that understand that kind of freedom.
It's a very calm freak out.
Yeah.
So that's one thing about this show is how it sort of occupies and is in dialogue with the architecture of the space. And another is, as you were describing the mesh and the spray canvas, the handling of light and of course its relationship to color. But I think there's been a lot of development in your thinking and work, which is a softer, a more subtle, maybe more organic way of thinking about or handling light. And in this room, you know, we could look at the paintings there, which are on aluminium panels, being quite rigid, and the reflector towers as well. But with the mesh spheres, that installation, with the net in the corner, with the spray canvas behind us, it's opened up something of a direction for you, and of course the film and the light in the film opened up a new direction of thinking about the way light works.
I think I found that over the years that I've been kind of, you know, I've been really trying hard to move away from kind of this rigid approach to my work. And I know that there are moments in the studio that I really enjoy not thinking about anything and just working and playing with the materials and seeing what happens and seeing where it takes and seeing mistakes happen, seeing how what the limits are of some of the materials that I use. And I found that through that process that actually I need to have a balance between the two, the kind of really hard edge kind of geometry and what that does to the space, to something that is much more organic, where it really allows me to kind of be a bit more kind of relaxed and a bit more looser in the way that I'm thinking or approaching some of the materials. And not to be so precious about it either. You know, I do tend to be quite precious about things. I like things exactly where I leave them. I like things to be ordered, and I realize that that is something that's kind of driving people crazy around me. So I, trying to kind of find a balance within myself, but also, I don't know, it feels like a therapy session.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say it's a very,
sorry,
very psychological interview.
I know.
It's good.
But it's made me think about what is it that I'm, craving for? What is it that I find exciting about, a body of work like this, where I don't have to be so conscious of the edge and its kind of finishes, that I can be a lot more kind of physical with it as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the earlier work involved sort of metal and the precision that metal brings, and then planes of color applied usually with industrial techniques, right? So there's no sense of your touch as an artist. It's like it's almost mechanically produced, right? And these are quite different in terms of leaving the traces of making, being much more organic.
No, definitely there is an element of kind of frustration with, wanting to perfect the technique more and more and more, and to the extent where, almost you lose the trace of the maker's hand, and there was something quite pleasurable about that, but also quite crazy. And I thought, I'm going down the crazy route, and wanted to kind of pull back. So, I thought, actually, before I do go crazy, I need to. But there's definitely, I'm constantly trying to find a balance, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but that is, it was something, I think it was Ziba Alderland that had said that there's, with the work, there's a dual experience, and within that dual experience, there's this kind of calm, quite reflective moment, but then there is also this kind of vibrant and quite bold, and it's trying to get the balance between the two to work. And I don't know if I've achieved that in the show.
Yes, but it is also articulated. I mean, I think when you're looking at the work like this, the canvas, that sort of dualism or two ways of making sort of comes out, that you're, it's of a scale that it occupies your peripheral vision. The spots are soft, so your eyes sort of move around the canvas, and you can lose focus or defocus, and it becomes sort of blurred landscape in that sense. But there are also lots of drips that come off, as a result of spraying directly on the canvas and then it running down. And those are quite sharp and so that your eye then picks up and focuses on those points. So I think there's lots of like zoning in and out and then moving across. There's a lot of movement in the work.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was really excited about, actually, because initially I was like, I could see the depth, I could see the layers, I could see how the work for me was quite sculptural. It didn't feel like a flat plane that I was working on. It felt really sculptural. But what was really exciting was that, like you were describing, that it was kind of in and out, kind of in terms of focus, but it forces the viewer to really move. And I think this is the way that you have to experience most of the work, that you have to move around. None of the work allows you to kind of sit still other than the video. You have to really move and not only experience the work but experience this space. And I think that is what I found really exciting, and it's through the conversation with you and with Sarah and my team in the studio that I'm able to kind of understand where this is kind of going and the direction it's going. So.
Yeah. And time is a part of that as well.
Yeah.
So of course, because you have to see something, experience it with your eyes, maybe a bit with your body as well, that experience unfolds over time because it takes the time to mover. So this show, I think, adds that layer onto your work of more time in viewing.
Yeah, I think, so this piece, for instance, it started off in the courtyard on its side, kind of, and we started working on it, unrolling it, painting, and then rolling it back up. So we could never really understand where it was going, how people were going to experience it, or how the work itself was going to come together, because it's 10 meters. How do you make that length kind of work? So when we brought it into the studio and it was kind of folded around, to the wall, it was a very different experience, and it made me kind of really want to see the kind of the physical impact that it would have.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were talking about the height of the, where the canvas is hanging, and I mean, Cliff was on FaceTime, and we were having this discussion, and you were saying it needed to be higher, and I was going, no, I need it lower. And sometimes I am struggling to kind of explain and with words what it is that I'm wanting out of that kind of experience. And I felt the work really needed to be lower, needed to kind of really connect with the body, for it to really work. So that 10 centimetres did make a massive difference.
So that's where we are. Let's turn to the video in the room over there. So your first work in this medium
Don't judge me.
But it brings together all of these themes that we've been touching on, right? Yeah. So the light, and of course Dappled Light takes a very literal meaning from that, which is a forest view, graveyard, where the light's filtering through the canopy. But it's quite complex in all the different things it's doing. So tell us more about it. It's photography at its base, it's time-lapse, but it's presented as a film or a video.
So that's a body of work that actually started initially in my residency at with Tates and Ives. And so I was there in Portsmouth Studios for a month, and I had this incredibly beautiful studio that looked out onto the sea. And I could, in St Ives, I mean, you really see the light changing dramatically within, a couple of hours. It can change, and it's being reflected on the sea and the landscape. And I really wanted to kind of capture that. I wanted to capture that change. I wanted to capture the drama. I wanted to capture the colours. And I was really struggling and trying to figure out how to do it. So I started doing these kind of time-lapse videos almost every day out of the window. And I felt like, okay, that's not, it wasn't enough for me. I then started doing watercolours from that. So that's when that body of work started. And then I moved into my new home and studio where it's designed and built so that I have the maximum amount of natural light coming into the space in the living and workspace. And the brief was, when it was first designed, was that I have to have natural light. I've been kind of deprived of natural light in previous studios, like almost all artists. And that was something that was really important. And so when I first moved in, I was really taken by the change, and you really experience the change of light throughout the day and throughout the week, throughout the month, and throughout the year. And I started again taking time-lapse videos, and it didn't feel enough. It didn't feel like I really captured what I was experiencing and what it was that I was seeing. And so I then set up a camera in my daughter's room. And the reason I set it up there was that right in front of her bedroom window there is a tree with ivies up, and Hackney Council had kind of cut the roots so that the ivy wasn't destroying the tree. But what was really beautiful was how you can really see the light falling on the branches and the roots. And I thought, this is beautiful because not only do you see it kind of right in the foreground, but you also see the change of light in the background as well. And I thought that gave a different kind of depth to that image that you're seeing. And so I've taken 2 years worth of photographs, and what's in the film is just one single year. And it's the first year of being in the new place, and I've, it's been really wonderful seeing the connection with the video now with different series, and even the video has this movement where it feels like the tree is kind of breathing because of the movement within the wind, when it's windy. And so the photo is it consists of photos taken every hour during the day, and so we only it captures the full day, but we've taken out the night shots, and so you only see the days, and so the days kind of merge into one another, which I'm really excited about. I don't know why, but yeah.
Well, because it's also really technically ambitious and an achievement to have brought all that together. So it's like a year's worth of daytime photos, 1 an hour, and then stitched together as a sort of handmade time lapse. So it's not quite the same thing as sticking your phone on a tripod and pressing the time lapse mode. But it's been far more constructed in a sense, but it also captures a huge amount of time and presents it. I think it's at 35 or 6 minutes in the end.
37 minutes.
37 minutes. And I like very much what you're saying about even though that work, you can think of it as figurative because it's capturing a sort of forest scene, that you were talking about the light in the same way as actually this canvas, in terms of its layers and the depths of light and the changing light as they sort of shift in the fore and the background.
Yeah, sometimes you actually see the light kind of, going across the cemetery, and that is quite breathtaking when you see that. But I forgot to mention that initially, that body of work was going to be shown as stills and almost looking like a graph, and I was like, how, I was thinking about how visually you might see the change or how it might be documented, and I almost wanted it in that way, to look like documentation, but also through that documentation, the geometry that might come up. In that kind of, so that was something else that was going to happen, but it ended up becoming a film, which I think is much more exciting.
Yeah, these things are at different attention, and so I remember looking at this as a series of photographs. So if you had thousands of photographs of all the different times and states of light, that when you put them all out on a big grid, say it filled the whole wall, you would then take a step back and you'd see sort of natural progressions of how the day was shortening or lengthening, or the intensity was changing from one season to the next. But there it's actually visceral. So you actually feel it because the thing is motion, and the way we see as humans.
I think that's what would have, I don't know if it would have been lost. I think you would have got a different kind of movement. But I'm really excited about this movement. But the other thing that I hadn't expected, which is that, I was screaming a lot at Aisha, trying to keep the door shut. I was like, you've got to keep the door shut, because when you turn on the lights in the hallway, it's reflected in the window. But there's something about that.
She needs a credit on the wall label.
She does need a credit. But there's something about that you know, that I feel like it kind of brings you back to reality, brings you back to the kind of, you know, the physical kind of aspect of that space or the view as well. So you see sometime, you know, artificial light reflected on the wall as well. That's,
yeah, and scale is important as well with that room and as a projection. So it's pretty much life-size in terms of how it was viewed versus how you experience it, I think.
Yeah, no, that was really important. I think it's strange because, you know, when you think about kind of the space and you think about how big it is and you think, okay, I really want to do something that fills it, you still kind of come back to the body. You still come back to kind of how the body relates to the space and to the work as well. So we tried it out in the studio at a much kind of fuller scale and really blowing it up, and it just didn't work in the same way. You know, and it's interesting how it does that with all of the work. It kind of brings you back down again to reality and kind of grounds you. So yeah, it forces you to do that. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Good. So I thought we might also then move over to questions from the audience. So I think there'll be a roaming microphone coming around. But does anybody have questions for Rana?
I don't know if we put everyone to sleep. I've got my glasses on.
Right there, yeah.
Where did Dappled Light come from? Was it at the beginning of the exhibition, or were you given that as a commission?
The title?
Yes.
That came.
It's so good.
That came actually right at the end through the conversation with Cliff, and when we were discussing kind of how the work and the strand that was kind of that was connecting the works.
Yes.
And it's always something that's, I mean, been kind of, you know, been fascinated by.
So were you just commissioned to give an exhibition?
Yes. The title came after.
Women's art through history has been so hidden. It's been there, but it's been hidden. I was fascinated to hear you talking about finding the confidence, finding the eye, finding the vision. Do you think that's become any easier for women nowadays, or was it always there and we didn't know?
I don't know if it has become any easier for women and women's voice to be. I think there are more opportunities, and I feel like, you know, a more conscious decisions are being made in the way that we look at the art world now. It doesn't just consist of white male, you know, figures that are creating more ambitious work. So I think, you know, time has changed, but I don't know if women feel more confident at all. I think what is really exciting, and in the talk that I was doing earlier was quite amazing to see, is this, we've got this huge array of artists that we didn't know about, and because of what's been happening in the last you know, 4 or 5 years, that we are able to discover those artists, and more amazing artists are coming out, and that is giving us confidence to kind of say, yes, you know, I can do this. Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Questions at the back there.
Thank you. Also, the conversation, really enlightening. You've talked a lot about all of these new strands of work that you've developed, and so I'm curious, what would you like to do next? What's the next strand? Or the strand you'd like to continue out of what you've tested here, let's say?
Well, actually, Cliff and I are going to be, this show is touring to Mead Gallery and Manor. I'm really excited to see how the works are going to respond to the space there, because it's very different, and it's at a completely different scale as well. So I was actually thinking about that on the drive here, and I was thinking, where is the work going to go? I have no idea, and I quite like that, not knowing where it's going to go. I know that some of the projects that are coming up are going to be challenging and are exciting and will really push the work. So even the large outdoor work that I'm doing for Line and Pitshanger, there's a lot to think about, and I know that I'm feeling like I want to have some space and time to think about what happened, you know, think about actually, one, how the work really, how the view is kind of, or how I've kind of experienced the work in the space, but also in connection with each other and what that means. You know, part of me feels like, you know, I want to kind of really retreat, and retreat not just as an artist, but also, you know, the work to retreat, to become, I don't know, quieter in some ways, I don't know. But that's kind of what's going on in my head at the moment. And I don't know if it's because, you know, when you do a show like this, it can be quite overwhelming, and you really want to kind of take the time out and think about things.
There's also, I mean, you're also doing quieter, I don't know if that's the right word, but work than what's presented here.
Yeah.
It's like the opportunity of the exhibition is to bring together work that speaks to each other.
Yeah.
But there's always things going on in the background that are sort of...
I mean, I don't mean in sense of when you look at these works, there is a sense of calm and contemplative moments with these reflector, and in the same way with the net, you know, the way the light kind of falls on it. Each of those work have that. I think there's something else that I'm thinking about, and I can't quite put my finger on it, and maybe I'm not explaining that very well. I don't know.
I mean, there's also been learning too, with installing the mesh piece, the mesh installation, discoveries and learning for the first time how you can push the medium in material.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have come up for me doing this show that I really want to kind of reflect on, and I think that's probably what it is that I think that was a good question too.
Is there another question?
Do you have a favourite piece of the show?
Can't ask me that. That's really difficult. I think I would probably say the video and the mirror piece, the kind of for the moment. But it changes each time. Each time I walk in here, it kind of really changes. It initially started off with this work because it's been so stressful working on this painting, not knowing if it's going to work, that you know, so it kind of changes each time I come and visit the show. And these have been a real kind of surprise as well, these towers. I think it's also in the way that we've kind of, you know, placed them, and especially when you come back round and you see these, so it really changes depending on the mood I'm in, I think.
It is nice that the space sort of pushes you to come at things twice. So once as you come in and you experience the show, and then you sort of unwind, and then you come back out and catch everything from
a different
slightly different viewpoint. I mean, I'm quite partial to the mesh installation in this iteration, because I think the way you described it and the way it has taken shape, and now you all need to go back after the talk and see it again, was a surprise, and is something new in the sense of understanding that the work, it can tell a story almost as you're moving around it. So the back.
Yeah, that's why
is a
I was
surprise,
kind of really reluctant to even have the text in the show. And it's like that with most of my work, is that I kind of, you know, the work should really do that. And I felt the show, what was really, I feel really successful, is that it really does that. It explains without having to have a text. So I'm really grateful for that. I don't think I would have been able to do that without you. So, yeah.
Any other questions? No? Thomas is giving us a clap. Yeah. Closing with a clap.
Thank you.